I can sit down. I can sit down with the best of them. And I can take my phone out, and I can put it on silent. I had an argument in my G2 group. Not really an argument, it's just me voicing my opinion against a perceived opposition. And it was, you can actually turn your phone off. Like, did you know your phone can turn off? Like somebody was, I won't name the person, but their initials are Steve Atchison. Oh, oops, no, I'm teasing, Steve. And, no, it was like, we were talking about being silent with Jesus and lingering, and he's like, well, yeah, but my phone keeps beeping. I was like, well, you can turn it off. He's like, well, I guess I could silence it. And I was like, no, you can turn it off. I guess I could just, ignore it. And it's like, no, you really can turn it off, like it has an off button. On iPhone, you just hold the button down. Let me just practice and see. Well, that's Siri. He's coming up asking me, what can you help me with? You can help me turn this stupid phone off. Seriously, No. But I'm trying to do it here. I can do it. As I talk, if I'm doing it, Siri keeps interrupting. Then interrupted by a phone. But that's my point, is that we're going to keep doing this. I didn't police you last week. I didn't watch for phone usage. But if you're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or playing a game of solitaire while we're singing or preaching, that's wrong. That is a no-no. And I prayed that you would just get this bad burning sensation in your stomach if you did that. I didn't pray that. I just lied. I didn't pray that. But I would like for you to not play on your phones while we're preaching or singing. But, Courtney, if you sing songs like that, it's hard to not sing with you. So that was beautiful. Thank you guys, our whole band. I appreciate you leading in worship, true worship. A lot of times when someone is facing a challenging time or difficulty, we might ask them a question like this. We might just say, so how are you managing? Right? You've been asked that question. How are you managing? What we're asking is, how are you handling the circumstances, right? How are you moving through what you're facing? How well are you dealing with the situation? Or if we hear someone who did something that caused a lot of difficulty for themselves, they really messed up, they did something on the not intelligent side of the spectrum, we could say, how did you manage that, right? So you could ask those questions a couple ways, but the key word is manage. And the idea of manage is, how do you respond to and handle the circumstances that are at your disposal? Because circumstances, you don't get to pick. Most often, you don't get to pick your circumstances. Circumstances, generally, most of what goes on in life happens to us. And what if a trusted friend were to ask you this question right now? Now, I'm not assuming I'm your trusted friend, but I'm going to give voice to the question as if I am. And I want you to ask yourself this question: how are you managing your life? How are you managing? I'm not asking exactly how you are doing it, but how are you doing? How are you managing? When it comes to your life, how are you managing? The big picture, how's your life going? How's it working out? Maybe I don't qualify, like I said, as a trusted friend, but I'm asking you to do that. Maybe even write it down right now. Like just a word, like not good, average, great, terrible, somewhere on there. Or maybe on a 1 to 10 thing. It's a simple question that can have huge range of responses, can it? The other day I sat down with a couple that I only know casually. I really don't know them well. I don't know much about them. I know some things about them, but I'm really kind of a first name casual acquaintance. So I just asked them how they were doing. Honestly, it was just a conversation starter. It was just one of my goofy intros to, hey, the pastor's sitting with you. Don't feel awkward here, because I'm awkward myself and I don't need any help. I just asked them, I said, so how are you doing? And I said, on a 1 to 10 basis. And I tried to be real extreme, like 10 is as good as you could ever possibly imagine being, and 1 is like, I wish I weren't, having to live this life at all. 1 is terrible, like I don't even want to take another breath. And one of them looked at the other with a look that said, go ahead. He asked. And he said one. So, me and my goofy self were like, oh yeah, well, one, really? And he just straight face. He looked at him, he looked at her, kind of tears. Like, oh, wow, I just bit off more than I intended to bite off. And I can't run now. Didn't want to. And I just said, hey, if you want to talk, I'll listen. I was able to talk to the individual, but brought to mind this question. I don't know what I'm speaking to when I ask you, how are you doing? How's your life going? How are you managing? I realize today that if we can muster up the courage to honestly step back, look at our lives and how we're managing. It's not all fluffy bunnies, sunny skies, and chocolate ice cream, is it? It's not always that way. In fact, I find more often than not that while there are some good, there's some really, mundane, and there's almost always some deep pain, some nagging issue, some part of life that seems to fracture everything else. So when I ask the question, how are you managing, I want you to know something, that I'm not asking it lightly. I might have, had I not had that experience. I might have just done it as a sermon intro to get you to think, kind of connect with you. But I realized today when I ask you that, and I could bring to mind some stuff, right? You can be honest with yourself right now. I realize we're treading into areas that could be painful, and this isn't group therapy. I get that. But here's what it is. We are a group of people who are bent on, set on, focused on learning how to do life with Jesus. Together. For the great benefit of the world. That's not an easy thing. That's not an easy ministry to lead. That's not an easy way. If you're really calling people into that, if our elders and our deacons are saying, this is it, this is the focus, this is what it means to be a church, this is what it means to be a disciple, it's not easy because it's a reorientation of your life. It's not just something you add to it. It's not a quick fix. It's not a simple, hey, here's how to have a better marriage in 3 simple steps. Here's how to get out of debt when no one else knows how to do it and I can fix it today. It's not a simple little, here's how to have better friends kind of thing. To do life with Jesus is a reorientation of your life, and it's work, and you have to want to do it, and not everybody does. But I believe that last part is only true because we don't know how good it actually could be. We think we're stuck. Listen, the person I talked to, the one, absolutely convinced that's just their lot in life. You may be a 6 or 7 or 4. And just be convinced, this is my lot in life, this is just how it is. Life isn't perfect. You got all the reasons and excuses to just stay stuck on the spectrum where you are. But I realize this, I believe this. Church, I want you to know, I believe everything I preach. I don't preach to you stuff I don't believe, but when I want to emphasize something, I want you to know I lingered with this. This is in my heart. This is my core. And I'm being vulnerable here. I believe the gospel, the good news of Jesus, that the kingdom of God has come, that we can live in it through obedience to Jesus. I believe the gospel that Jesus came announcing brings real, brings powerful, brings life-altering hope. No matter where you are on the spectrum, I was able to, cool experience, to be able to look at that person, the one who said life, is not really worth living, and say, there is hope. You know what they said? It's true too. Hope is dangerous. When you're a 1, hope is dangerous. Because you've tried a lot of other things, right? And they hadn't worked. You got your hopes up. Has anybody ever said that? No, don't get your hopes up. Why do we say that? Because we don't. Hope is dangerous. That is, hope that's up to us is dangerous. But I'm telling you this, learning to live life with Jesus is real hope, and it's not dangerous. It's a certainty if we want to enter into it. So, if we ask the question, how is life going? How are you managing? The reason there's a range is because our willingness to yield and recognize God as owner of everything, our willingness to recognize Him and submit to Him, to surrender to Him as owner, as proprietor, as ultimate authority, who has ultimate responsibility. The reason we are on a range, you could be a 6 one week and a 3 the next, or vice versa, is because we have this unwillingness to recognize God as an owner and ourselves as stewards / managers. Those are synonyms. And that's a process of learning to do it. That is, I'm not going to preach a sermon on becoming a steward, living as a steward, and then you go home and the next week you're 100% there. You're living life as a steward. You've adopted identity as a steward, and God is owner of everything. It's a process. It is harder to surrender some parts of your life to God as the true owner and you as a steward than other things. Generally, that has to do with how much pain that particular thing is inflicting on your life. And here's the rule in my life. The more painful it is, the harder it is for me to entrust God with that thing, whatever it is. The more painful it is, and I preached this one time, if you bash your thumb, if you smash your thumb in a door, oh my gosh, that hurts. But you don't stick it away from you and say, somebody fix this, somebody fix it. The first thing you're going to do is pull it in and hold it. It's all you got. Your only resources for a smashed thumb is to hold it with your other hand until help arrives, right? This is what we do when we're in a lot of pain, emotionally, mentally, and physically. We pull in. But our goal is to extend ourselves and to trust God. So last week we looked at the fact that all of mankind has plunged into sin. We are living this broken life because of one single issue. That is the issue of ownership versus stewardship and getting it mixed up. Sin is born out of our refusal to trust God and instead to trust ourselves. That's the essence of where it all comes from. That's the essence of any time you sin, that's what you've done. You've taken ownership of your life, you've called the shot, and you've done it independently of God. We do that and we see fit to do it ourselves, to secure our own good apart from God. Stewardship, listen, and I'm going to move into the passage. Stewardship, managing your life, managing the things that God's given you. Stewardship describes, in one sense anyway, the capacity of our soul to be a manager and not an owner. Stewardship describes your capacity. Your soul was not designed with the capacity to own anything. It was designed, it was created for the purpose of management, not stewardship. So, having said that, look at Luke chapter 12, and let me walk through this passage together. Luke chapter 12, verses 13 through 21. And this is a parable. It starts off with a question, or Jesus being asked a question, or to intervene in a dispute. And then he teaches the principle by a parable that we're going to walk through. So listen to this closely and just kind of let it wash over you the first time, because we're going to walk through it in detail. Don't get lost right now in a word or studying. Just kind of get the big picture here. In fact, it's okay if you want to close your eyes and just let this come in audibly. If you need to read it to get it, go ahead and do that. But let's do a big picture right here. Luke chapter 12, verse 13 through 21. Here's what it says. Someone in the crowd said to him, that is to Jesus, Teacher, that tells you something right there. Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me. But he said to them, Man, who appointed me a judge or arbitrator over you? Then he said to them, Jesus said to them, Beware and be on your guard against every form of greed. Now listen to this next statement. This is powerful. And it applies to more than money, but this is what he's speaking to. For not even when one has an abundance does his life consist in his possessions. Not even one has an abundance does his life consist, or is it made up of his possessions. And he told them this parable, saying this, the land of a rich man was very productive. And he began reasoning to himself, the rich man did, saying this, what shall I do, since I have no place to store my crops? That is, he had too many. He didn't have big enough barns. So he said to himself, what shall I do, since I have no place to store my crops? Then he said, this is what I will do. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up for many years to come. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your soul is required of you. Now I want to go back just real quick. Remember what he said in verse 19? I will say to my soul. Whose soul? My soul. He's speaking to his soul as the ultimate authority, as the one responsible for it. I will say to my soul, soul, you have da-da-da-da. Then God says to him, he says to him, this night your soul, the one you think you own, is required of you. And now, who will own what you prepared? Here's the point of the story. So is the man, so is the woman, so is the teenager, so is the child who stores up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God. There are several important things to draw out of that parable and that help us learn how to live life and remain in a life of stewardship. There are several. And we're not going to, in fact, there's one main point. We just got it. To be rich towards God and not towards ownership of the things of this world. But the first thing, here's the first thing I want us to draw out of this. And that is, we get derailed, taken off track from a life of stewardship when we believe a false narrative. And here's this false narrative. Here's the false narrative. You check yourself here, okay? You ask yourself if you believe this false narrative, and here it is. We are capable of finding abundant life apart from God. I am capable. This is a false narrative to believe, and this is what leads us to thinking we're owners instead of managers, is we start thinking, I know how to live my life in order to be happy, productive, peaceful, all of that. We believe this false narrative that I am capable of finding abundant life apart from God. If you believe that at any level, you will live that way. And when you live that way, you begin to take ownership of the things in your life, even your very soul, and your soul does not even have the capacity to live like an owner. It was not made that way. It is a false narrative, a story that we have bought largely from our society. And listen, everybody that lives in the United States of America has been fed this line. Everybody. There's no one sitting here within the range of my voice that does not struggle with refuting this false narrative. That I am capable of finding abundant life apart from God. So that's what the person in the crowd believed. That's why he was saying, Jesus, this isn't fair. I am not happy because fairness is not taking place. Tell my brother to give me my half. And his assumption was if Jesus made it fair, he would be happy. That was his assumption. If I can get my half of the inheritance, everything will be fine, and you can go on your way, Jesus, and I'll go on my mind. I need you to help fix my problem because I know the solution, and apparently people listen to you, so you can help accomplish what I think I need to do in order to be happy. You don't ever pray that way, do you? You've never asked God to help you accomplish your agenda. You've never come up with the right idea for how to fix your problem and told God that now we need to enact this. Of course. This is the heart of this. This is what we are doing as we learn how to do life with God. See, it's that Jesus knows this man is relying on something other than him. That he's relying on his wealth to bring what? Abundant life. And when I say abundant life, I mean all the stuff that you're really looking for. I'm happy. I have peace. I have confidence. I have hope. I feel secure. I feel content. Life is okay, and even more than that, where life is good. It's when you wake up and you're excited about the day, not just like, oh, I wish I could sleep for 6 more hours. It's when you have a sense of peace or an overflow in your life where you feel like you have the capacity to love and care for others instead of marshaling the forces that you have and the resources to somehow get yourself to a point where you can breathe enough, to relax enough, to sleep enough so that you feel okay so you can start it all over the next day. Jesus says to that, he says, beware and be on your guard against every form of greed. You know what greed is? Greed is a person who perceives themselves to be an owner who is taking what they think they need or even deserve in order to be happy. Greed is an ownership problem. You think you own what somebody else possesses, so you're going after it. That's what was going on with this. Jesus, tell him to give me what is mine, mine is fair. So he says, be on your guard against every form of greed, for not even when one has abundance does his life consist of his possessions. It is true that there are wealthy people who have so much money that money is never an issue, who are very happy. It is also true that there are poor people who live even less than paycheck to paycheck who are very happy. And it is also true that there are people who have very much money in that first category who are miserable. And there are people on the other end of the spectrum who are poor and don't know when the next meal is coming who are miserable. The point is this, that money is not the factor there. Money is not where they feel like they're finding their security from. And that's what Jesus is pointing to. And let me say this because I need to be sensitive to this. If we were to be living in true poverty, abject poverty, like hunger is an issue, we wouldn't say a person is sinning because they're stressed by that factor. We wouldn't diminish their faith because they're struggling there and they're not perfectly joyful. I want to be very sensitive to that fact, okay? What I'm saying is the abundance or lack of is not the determining factor of whether we can have hope and peace, which is abundant life. So, we get derailed when we believe we're capable of finding and securing what our souls long for. So I want to ask you that question again. Do you think that? Do you believe that? Are you functioning that? All you got to do to figure that out is are you functioning that way? Why do you do what you do? Why do you act on... When you get worried, what do you do? When you get anxious, when you face a problem, what do you do? How do you deal with that? How do you manage that circumstance? And I'm not asking if you just pray. I told you last week, I have mastered the art of worrying while I pray. Absolutely. In fact, I would boil it down to like this. Some of my prayer in the past has been nothing more than me asking Jesus to help me worry or be with me as I worry and perpetuate it. It hasn't been a movement towards trust. It's just been verbalizing my fear and anxiety and self-reliance. So to drive this point home, Jesus tells them this parable, and he uses this parable to communicate a primary point. And in the parable, there's a farmer who had very productive land. His land was so productive that it outgrew all of his barns. So he had so much corn that he could not store all of his corn. He had so many soybeans, he could not store them all. Whatever you want to call the crop, he didn't have. So he did. Would anybody blame him for his line of reasoning? And what do? I have more than I could possibly store. So he said, I thought to myself, I will tear down these small barns and I will build bigger barns to hold my abundance. And because if I can hold all my abundance, if I can hold the overflow, I don't have to, I could retire. That's what he's saying. He says it like this. I think this is great wording. He says, I will say to my soul, I will say to the core of who I am, no worries, all is well. I have more than I need for years to come. That was his reason. Listen, we know we are not supposed to agree with that line of reasoning in the basis and the context of this parable, but this is very normal thinking. It is very, very common. Some of you may be worried today because you don't have enough in retirement to retire when you think you're going to retire. And some of you might be on the exact opposite spectrum, say, I have nothing to worry about because I have more than enough in retirement. I could quit today, or I have. And and you're relying on that for your peace. That's the point. You're relying on that for your peace. It could be, I don't have any struggles in school, socially or academically, or it could be that I'm healthy and I just count on my health. It's all of this other stuff to find what we're really looking for, and we get derailed when we think that we're the ones capable. So Jesus tells us this, and he says the conclusion is this: you fool. He says to the farmer, you fool, with what is absolutely normal, common, everyday thinking. I don't have big enough space, so obviously I will keep what I've. We could even say this: God has blessed me with an abundance, so I will keep it all. What is glaringly obvious in the parable is the man never thanked God for the abundance, and he never asked God what to do. That was Jesus' point. And so he calls him a fool, one who has no reasoning or ability to reason. And he says, you're a fool because this very night, the soul you think you own is going to be required of you. Which is a statement is you don't own your soul. You're not the one in authority over your soul. It could be required of you. This has been used in churches across the country for years to manipulate people to say, you don't know, you could die tonight, right? You don't know, you better get right with God because you could die tonight. There's truth in that, but it's just we're using it the wrong way when we say that. The truth is this, is that we aren't in control of our soul. We don't own our soul. You don't get to dictate how long your soul is in this body. We don't get to dictate. So to act like you do is what Jesus calls foolish. So if we stopped here, if we stopped before he said that part, you fool. If we just stop with, I'm build bigger barns, store it up, I'll have enough, retirement plan, great. If we stop there, we could just conclude that the man didn't do it God's way, but it all worked out, right? It wasn't the right way. He should have prayed about it. It wasn't necessarily the right way, but who could blame him? Or it wasn't necessarily the right way, but what else would you want him to do? You could end that story a lot of ways. But Jesus ends it, and it's a parable. It's a parable. It's a story. We don't know that this is real or fictional, but it's not meant to be factually ascertained. It's meant to get the point across, and the point is this. This very night, the very night that you have thought these thoughts and it's not a punishment. He's not saying, hey, just because you thought that, I'm zapping you and you're going to die. He's saying how foolish it is to make a plan like that when tonight is your last night on earth. Then everything you do, everything you saved up, all goes to someone else. And he says that, so is the man who stores up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God. And so in that parable, his plan was not a smart plan when you look at it in the big picture. But don't you relate? Have you ever come up with a great idea? You thought, this is a great idea. Of course God would want me to do this. This is logical. What else would you do? And then you carry out that plan and you find out it was foolish. You can maybe look back to a relationship. At the beginning of the relationship, you were just infatuated and you just thought, man, this is obviously God's person for me. Man, I am so taken. Why would God not want me to be this happy? And so you just proceed on the assumption that this is God's plan for you. And you look back at it now and you go, man, that was foolish. I am glad that came to an end. Or you bought something or you started something. And I see this all the time. Today, when I see somebody under 30 vaping or whatever they're doing, or even worse, beginning drug habits or whatnot. Golly, just look at our news. Just look at our news and see where drugs take us. And we just think, man, there's no consequence to my actions. There's no consequence to that. And then people are dying, and we look back and say, oh, man, it could be as simple to thinking, I am the one person totally capable of texting and driving because I have it down. And you just think you have that down until you don't have it down. What I'm saying is our logic, we become reliant on it, our own ability, our own capability. And then we place more on your soul than it's capable of sustaining. Our soul is not designed for stewardship and not management. But the ownership problem is the easiest to see when we talk about stuff today. what you own. It's easiest to see. It manifests itself the most clearly. Here's what James says. Let me read this passage. We're coming to the close here. James, Jesus' younger brother, says, look here, you rich people. That comes across like snipey. It's not how it's intended. He's calling people of wealth to pay attention. He said, look here, you rich people. By rich people, he's talking to people who are trusting their wealth instead of God. And he tells them, weep and groan with anguish because all of the terrible troubles ahead of you. Your wealth is rotting away, and your fine clothes are moth-eaten rags. Your gold and silver are corroded. The very wealth you are counting on will eat away your flesh like fire. The corroded treasure you have hoarded will testify against you on the day of judgment. Here's what Jesus is saying. He is not saying it is wrong to be wealthy. He is not saying it is wrong to have abundance of possessions. He is saying it is a travesty to trust them for anything other than what they are, something to steward under God's direction. When we begin to own them, when we begin to possess them, that's what happens. So here's the point. Acting like owners instead of stewards always ends bad. It does. James is talking about this tragic outcome of acting like the owner instead of the steward, and when we count on anything other than God to secure our good, it will inevitably lead to tragic consequences. And so there's no clearer, simpler statement that speaks to this than Jesus' own words, and I want you to let them sink in. Just pay attention, listen to his words, and here's what he says. He said, whoever at Covenant Baptist Church, whoever is here in the range of his words that speak through eternity, whoever wishes to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. Paraphrase. Whoever surrenders their life to me as the owner of all will find real life. And there is no other life to find. So, let's do this to wrap it up. What does it look like to live life as a steward? There are two things I want to tell you. The first thing, this is it. This is our part. The first thing is to submit to God as the ultimate authority. When I use the word submit, I know, I'm aware, I read, I'm fully cognizant that brings up issues for people. To submit seems to, the fear it brings is that we become vulnerable to someone that doesn't have our best interest in mind. So I recognize that. But let me put this in context. When we talk about submitting to God, we're talking about submitting to one who loves you perfectly and is entirely safe to submit to him. I know that's a whole other message, but I just want you to at least have that so you can move forward. So here's what it looks like to submit. First thing, if you're going to submit to God, you have to know the truth. There is no other way to truly submit to one, to become vulnerable to their authority over your life, when you have to know the truth. And here's the truth in Matthew 20:18. The truth is that he has all authority. Whether you submit or not, it doesn't change the fact, because Jesus said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Authority means the right to do as one chooses. Jesus has the right. We can act like the authority, but we are never the authority. It is important to know that. The second thing is equally important, that is to respond to it. How do you respond to that truth? When Jesus said, all authority is mine on heaven and earth, he says, then we submit therefore to God. To submit means to place yourself in subjection to him, to willingly obey him, to desire to trust him enough to allow him to call the shots without resisting him. So James says it this way, submit therefore to God, resist the devil, and he'll flee from you. That is, resist the temptation to say, I'll build bigger barns. That's what I'll do. I'll just take care of myself. No, instead, submit yourself to God. Now, so that's the first thing. Submit to God as the ultimate authority. The second thing, trust, or you could say actively depend on God to be responsible for securing your good. Can I ask you a really important question? What are you depending on God for today? I mean, actively, literally relying on God to come through for you. That's what faith is. I want to ask you, you can say, well, to get me to heaven. isn't it strange, fair question, I think, that we could say, I'm trusting God to get me to heaven, but I said, would you trust God with your health? Well, I am. Well, why are you worried? Why are you anxious? Why are you constantly taking things into your own hand? Why are you asking God to bless your agenda for your health? Or your money? Or your relationships? Listen, submitting to God is trusting Him to show you the way forward. There is no other definition or way to trust God. In fact, in John chapter 6, verse 29, Jesus said it like this. This is the work of God for mankind. This is what God wants. That you believe in Him whom He has sent. Did you know the word believe, the primary meaning is to trust? Believe, we think, can be cognitive. That's not this word. This word means to actively trust and depend on. So I ask you again, what are you trusting God for? What are you relying on God for? Here's what I want us to do. Moment of being vulnerable again, or transparent. It is frustrating for me to preach a sermon like this. And here's what's frustrating for me, is that I want to control you. I do. Man, I wish I could get with you and make you do this. Not because it'd make me feel better, but because I really do know that this is the way forward. And I really am beginning to experience it in my own life. Well, I'm far, far from perfect at this. So I don't want to set myself up like, oh, let me show you how to do this. I got it all together. There are plenty of places I'm still struggling on the spectrum. But I'm telling you, this is hard for me because I want this. I believe this. And when I taste it, when I taste that and see that the Lord really is good, that He really does come through, that He really can secure my good, I want that more than anything for the people that I've been entrusted to shepherd and care for and to lead. And I'm telling you, it's hard for me. It's hard for me to not just kind of beat this to a pulp. So I'm going to stop here. I'm going to stop with this and just say, man, if you want to move forward in this, in trusting God to be owner, living like a steward, here, I'm going to give you one thing to do, and then we can work it out from there. I'm going to just suggest this. I want you to take the time to identify one thing that you own. I mean, you know good and well you own it. Oh, you act like you own it. But you hadn't asked God what to do with it ever. You've never actually asked God how you could use it for His kingdom or to bless others. It's just yours. Bank account, house, time, talent, whatever it is. You just own it. It is yours. Your health. I want you to find one thing, not five, one thing. One thing. You be honest. No one has to know it. God already does, so you can come clean with Him. One thing. You write it down. It's on your listening guide. You have a space to write it. Just write it down. I'd love for you to write it down now. Or write it down before you leave. Write it down. It doesn't take you long. Everybody knows what they own. Everybody knows what you've got control over, and you hope God never messes with it, right? You hope. But I promise you in the process, God's going to put His finger on it. So you might as well open the door now and say, okay, what do you want me to do? So let's practice this. Each day this week, every day, like for the next 7 days, for a whole week, I want you to take 20 seconds a day, or 20 minutes. I don't care how long it takes. I want you to ask God how He would want you to use it. Just ask Him. And ask Him to help you loosen your grip. Whatever it is. Say, God, help me loosen my grip. How do you want me to use this? Whatever it is. Ask one other person. This is important. Ask one other person to pray for you to be able to hear and understand what that is, and to do it. Trust one other person with this. Just one friend, spouse, parent, brother, sister, neighbor, whoever. One other person. And you ask them to follow up with you this coming Saturday. Okay? And I'm urging you, I'm urging you. I really, truly am urging you to practice this. Because here's what I think. Here's the vision that really beats in my heart for this. If you taste and see that the Lord really is good in this one thing, whatever it is, if you see that He really can secure your good, that He really will, that He's present and active, and He'll step into the middle of that. If you say, God, loosen my grip, let me let go and trust you, and you're in your brain, you're going to say this, what if He takes it away? What if He takes it away? What if I love it so much He's just going to take it away? I can promise you this, if He takes it away, whatever it is, and you're trusting Him, you'll discover you didn't need it, and you are better without it. Some of you are in there. I know what you're doing. I know, because I've done this. You're going, you're absolutely crazy. You're off your rocker. What if He takes that from me? And you're terrified. Step into it. Trust Him. He is, as we've sung many times, a good, good Father. And you can trust Him to own everything because He does. Pray with me. Father, it is still scary for me to relinquish my death grip on the stuff I think I own, the stuff I'm scared to let go of, the stuff I'm scared to lose because I think my happiness and my sense of security and safety is dependent on me having it, me owning it, me calling the shots. God, I'm praying this for our congregation, for myself, that the moment we start getting worried, we would see that as a blaring red flag to stepping into this realm of ownership when we only are called to steward. What a good gospel that says we only have to be stewards under a God who has proven beyond any shadow of a doubt that you will go to any length to secure our good for your glory. Jesus on a cross, in an empty tomb, and a risen Savior, and a present Holy Spirit, a living Word of God, all prove that. God, you help us submit ourselves before you and resist the devil so that he would flee and we could follow. It is in Jesus' matchless name. Amen.